Good evening, everyone. Tonight, we'll step into one of the darkest, most haunting stories history has ever recorded. Imagine this: Paris, 1793. The air is thick with the smell of blood and fear. A woman who once sat on a gilded throne at Versailles now lies alone in a damp stone cell, her crown replaced by a torn scarf. To her throne, now nothing more than a pile of mouldy straw. Every scratch of a rat, every cough of a guard reminds her that power and glory have turned to dust. And yet, amid the decay, there still flickers something the world cannot extinguish: the final dignity of a human being. They thought they could take everything: her title, her pride, her humanity. But they forgot one small and dangerous truth: you can cut off a queen's head, but you cannot cut the calm from her eyes. And believe me, if you or I were thrown into what Marie Antoinette endured in her final hours, we likely wouldn't survive the first night. So before you settle in, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly love what we're building here. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? And what time is it where you are? I love seeing how our little night owl community stretches across the world. Now, turn off the lights. Maybe let a fan hum softly in the background. And let's sink together into tonight's journey. Marie Antoinette was born on the 2nd of November, 1755, in Vienna, the capital of the Austrian Empire, with the full name Maria Antonia Josepha Johanna von Habsburg-Lothringen. She was the youngest daughter of Empress Maria Theresa, one of the most powerful women in 18th century Europe, and Emperor Francis I. From childhood, Marie was raised in the Schönbrunn Palace, a world of art, music, ceremony, and politics. In the Habsburg court, every child was a political tool, and Maria Antonia was no exception. At 14, she was promised to the Dauphin of France, Louis Auguste, grandson of King Louis XV, to secure an alliance between two former enemies, Austria and France. It was a marriage without love, arranged like a chess move, a ribbon to tie two kingdoms together. As her mother once said, in May 1772, a young Austrian girl left Vienna, crossed the Rhine, and entered France to the cheers of the crowd. At the border, Marie Antoinette was forced to leave everything behind: her clothes, her belongings, even her beloved pets, because according to ritual, she had to shed everything Austrian to become French. That was the first time she realized that being a princess did not mean being free. At the Palace of Versailles, Marie entered the dazzling yet merciless world of the Bourbon court. In 1774, when King Louis XV died, her husband, then only 19, became King Louis XVI, and she became Queen of France at 19. Both were too young, too naive, and wholly unprepared for the burden of a decaying kingdom. Louis XVI was gentle, diligent, but timid and awkward. Marie was charming, radiant, but inexperienced and easily drawn into frivolous amusements. At first, the French adored her, the beautiful daughter from Austria, but that admiration quickly faded. Versailles became a stage for endless balls, extravagant gowns, and towering hairstyles that scraped the ceilings. Marie adored fashion, music, and theatre more than politics. She spent lavishly on jewels, feasts, and even built her own private retreat, Petit Trianon, where she could escape the suffocating court life. There, she dressed in linen gowns, tended sheep, and played at being a noble peasant. But to the starving people of France, it was an insult, a cruel fantasy performed by the woman they blamed for their hunger. As famine spread through Paris, the people looked toward Versailles and saw a young queen laughing amid luxury. They forgot that France's economy was already collapsing before she arrived. They remembered only her face, the symbol of waste. Marie Antoinette bore 4 children, but only her eldest daughter, Marie Threws, survived the revolution. Her 2 sons died in prison, and her youngest, Sophie, died at 11 months old. Perhaps those losses transformed her from a careless girl into a resilient mother. In 1789, when the French Revolution erupted, Marie's life turned toward darkness. Versailles was stormed, and the royal family was forced to leave their gilded palace for the Tuileries in Paris, living under the watch of revolutionaries. From then on, she became the golden prisoner. While confined, Marie tried to keep her husband's spirit alive, taught her children, and wrote letters to her mother and sister in Vienna, pleading for help, but every attempt failed. When the king was executed in early 1793, she knew her own fate was sealed. From Austrian princess to Queen of France, then prisoner number 280. Marie Antoinette had walked through every peak and abyss a human could know. People may debate her faults, her extravagance, her political navet, but no one can deny that in her final moments, she faced death with the dignity of a queen. The life of Marie Antoinette, in the end, is a mirror reflecting an age both magnificent and merciless, where beauty and power could lift one to heaven, then send them crashing into hell with a single stroke of history's blade. The Conciergerie prison, standing beside the River Seine, had held countless enemies of the revolution. But that night, it became the home of the woman once called the Queen of France by all of Europe. No longer were there gilded walls or waltzes beneath candlelight at Versailles. There was only the sound of dripping water, the chill seeping through damp stone cracks, and the smell of mold mixed with the rust of iron chains. Marie Antoinette was no longer a queen. In the prison ledger, only 2 numbers were written: prisoner number 280. She had once been the center of every gaze, a woman before whom the entire court bowed. But now, 2 guards watched her every movement, when she ate, when she slept, even when she dressed. Privacy, the rarest luxury of royalty, had been stripped away. They did not kill her immediately. They punished her by forcing her to exist in humiliation. Hour after hour, minute after minute. Yet it was never physical pain that broke her. What truly shattered her heart was the night they took her young son, the little Prince Louis Charles. Only 8 years old, she had begged, had fallen to her knees, had clutched him tightly amid the echo of soldiers' boots in the dark. But they tore the child from her arms. She would never see him again. They say that in the long nights at the Conciergerie, she would quietly touch the tiny portrait and lock of her son's hair hidden in her bodice, the last relic of motherhood. And perhaps it was that which made her an unbreakable symbol. No crown, no throne, but she still had a mother's heart. And when the world tried to turn her into a monster before the public, she used that very love to remind them behind every hated emblem stands a human being. Now imagine you are standing in that cold stone room. The torchlight throws long shadows against the walls, and in the flickering glow, Marie Antoinette lifts her head. Not with the arrogance of a queen, but with the calm of someone who knows she is walking into the final chapter of destiny and will walk it on her own terms. The story begins in that moment, where a woman who has lost everything still holds on to the one thing: no one can steal dignity. At dawn on the 14th of October, 1793, footsteps echoed through the damp corridors of the Conciergerie. They came to take Marie Antoinette to trial. No ceremony, no gilded carriage, only the rattle of chains dragging across stone. The soldier carrying the torch did not look at her, as if before him was not a queen, but a ghost already fading from history. The trial was not truly a trial. It was a political performance. Every accusation rehearsed in advance. Before hundreds of spectators, Marie Antoinette was thrown into a wooden chair, her face gaunt, her hair turned white within months of imprisonment. The prosecutor read the charges like an actor reciting lines: treason, conspiracy to slaughter the people, incest with her son. Each word sliced through the air like a knife. The courtroom buzzed with whispers, sneers, and cruel laughter. But when they mentioned the child forced to testify against his mother, Marie Antoinette suddenly stood. She did not look at the prosecutor, did not defend herself. She turned toward the crowd, filled with working women of Paris, the same who had once dragged loaves of bread through the gates of Versailles, and her voice trembled softly, yet clear. I appeal to every mother here to speak in my defense. In that instant, she was no longer a queen, no longer the enemy of the people. She was simply a mother, falsely accused, stripped of her child, and that naked truth silenced the room. Some women bowed their heads, others wiped their eyes. For one brief moment, power returned to Marie Antoinette, not through a throne, but through humanity, but only for a moment. The death sentence was delivered as swiftly as if it had been inevitable. When the judge asked if she wished to speak, Marie merely shook her head. No complaints. No pleas. After all, there was nothing left to justify. That night, in her small cell, where candlelight flickered over cracked walls, she wrote her final letter to her sister-in-law, a farewell to her poor son who had been deceived into testifying against her. The handwriting trembled, yet every line was filled with gentleness and forgiveness. She wrote, "Forgive my son, he knew not what he did." The letter was never sent. It was confiscated, hidden away, like everything else they sought to bury with her name. And then, when dawn broke on the 16th of October over the cold Paris sky, the execution was prepared. There was no mourning dress. They forced her into a thin white gown like a criminal. They cut off her white hair and bound her hands behind her back. As the rope tightened around her wrists, Marie Antoinette murmured softly, "They did not do this to the king." A short sentence, but the final breath of pride. She knew she would die, yet refused to let them take her dignity. Amid the grind of wooden wheels on cobblestones, the screams of the mob, and filth thrown in her face, Marie Antoinette sat upright, eyes fixed forward. No tears, no begging, only silence, the one thing no blade could touch. That story tonight is the journey through darkness, to find the final light within a soul once hated by the world. And perhaps, in that last moment, when she softly apologized to the very man who tied her hands, Marie Antoinette triumphed not on the scaffold, but in the heart of history. Before her arrest, Marie had been the symbol of France's excess and indifference. The people mocked her with the nickname Madame Deficit, believing her lavish spending had bankrupted the nation. She adored parties, masquerades, dresses that weighed as much as a child, and hairstyles that brushed the ceiling. While Paris starved, Versailles shimmered with candlelight and champagne. But the truth, as history later revealed, was not so simple. Marie Antoinette was not the sole cause of France's ruin. Years of endless wars, a rotten tax system, and an economic collapse had already doomed the monarchy. Yet the masses needed a face to blame, and they chose her, the foreign, elegant woman who seemed untouched by suffering. When the revolution began, her image was twisted into that of a crowned monster. Satirical papers printed drawings of her with imaginary lovers, hosting debauched feasts, even mocking a phrase she never spoke: "If they have no bread, Let them eat cake. That sentence became the spark that burned away the last remnants of sympathy. When King Louis XVI was executed in early 1793, all hatred turned to her. To the radicals, Marie Antoinette was not just a queen, she was the final emblem of the old world that had to be erased. But killing her was not enough. They wanted to disgrace her before they destroyed her, so her death would seem like justice, not tragedy. They invented monstrous charges: conspiracy with Austria, plans to massacre citizens, and the most vile accusation of all, incest with her own son. It was not a legal charge, it was humiliation made into spectacle. It sought to strip away her identity as mother and woman, to turn her into a creature, so the crowd could cheer as the blade fell. But it was there that they failed. When she heard the accusation, Marie Antoinette did not cry or scream. She simply rose and said the words that silenced the court. "I call upon every mother here to judge me." The Conciergerie prison, set beside the River Seine, had once held countless enemies of the revolution. But that night, it became the home of the woman whom all Europe had once called the Queen of France. No more gilded walls or waltzes by candlelight at Versailles. Only the drip of water, the chill seeping through damp stone cracks, and the smell of mould mixed with the iron rust of chains. Marie Antoinette was no longer a queen. In the jailer's ledger, they wrote only 2 words and a number. Prisoner number 280. She had once been the centre of every gaze, before whom an entire court had bowed. But now 2 guards watched her every movement, when she ate, when she slept, even when she changed her clothes. Privacy, the rarest luxury of royalty, was stripped away. They did not kill her at once. They tormented her by making her live in humiliation, hour by hour, minute by minute. Yet physical pain was never what broke her. What shattered Marie Antoinette's heart was the night they stole away her little son, the Prince Louis Charles. Only 8 years old. She begged, knelt, clutched him in the dark amid the tramp of soldiers' boots. But they tore the boy from his mother's arms. She never saw him again. They say that on long nights in the conciergerie, she would quietly touch the tiny portrait and lock of her son's hair hidden in her bodice, the last relics of motherhood. And perhaps that is what made her an icon no humiliation could unmake. No crown, no throne, but still a mother's heart. When they tried to turn her into a public monster, she used that very love to remind the world behind every hated emblem stands a human being. Now imagine you are standing in that cold stone room. Torchlight throws long shadows on the walls, and in that wavering glow, Marie Antoinette lifts her head, not with the haughty look of a queen, but with the calm of someone who knows she is approaching the final chapter of fate and will walk it with her own poise. The story begins at that moment, where a woman who has lost everything still keeps the one thing no one can take dignity. On the morning of the 14th of October, 1793, footsteps rang dryly along the damp corridors of the conciergerie. They had come to take Marie Antoinette to court. No ceremony, no gilded coach, only the clatter of chains dragged over stone. The soldier bearing the torch did not look at her, as if before him stood not a queen but a ghost about to be erased from history. The trial was not truly a trial. It was a political performance in which every charge had been set in advance. Before hundreds of onlookers, Marie Antoinette was thrown into a wooden chair, her face gaunt, her hair turned white after only a few months in prison. The prosecutor read each accusation like a rehearsed play treason, plotting the slaughter of the people, incest with her son. Each word cut the air like a blade. The room hissed with whispers, contemptus staris, cruel smiles. But when they mentioned the child forced to testify against his mother, Marie Antoinette suddenly rose. She did not look at the prosecutor or argue. She turned toward the crowd working women of Paris, the same who had hauled loaves of bread to the gates of Versailles, and her voice trembled lightly, but was resolute. I appeal to every mother present in this room to speak in my stead. In that instant, she was no longer a queen, no longer the people's enemy. She was a mother, slandered and robbed of her child, and that bare truth silenced the hall. Some women bowed their heads, some wiped away tears. For a brief moment, power returned to Marie Antoinette, not through a throne, but through humanity, only for a moment. The Revolutionary Council had decided treason death. A day later, the sentence was carried out, not because her guilt was plain, but because France needed a scapegoat, a symbol to prove the revolution had defeated the past. And so, even as Marie Antoinette's head fell before the crowd, her image lived on proof that in the fury of humankind, sometimes it is the symbol that is killed more than the person. When the guillotine blade fell at noon on the 16th of October, 1793, the crowd in the Place de la Révolution erupted in cheers. "Vive la République! Long live the Republic!" they shouted, as if Marie Antoinette's death were France's final purification. In truth, it was only the beginning of another nightmare. Her body was tossed back onto the rough wooden cart that had carried her to the scaffold. No rite, no prayer, no wreath. They carted her corpse through streets of mud and blood to the Madeleine Cemetery, a small plot near the church of the same name. There, the Queen of France was thrown into a mass grave with dozens of other victims, those who had been beheaded in the revolution's drunken rage. No coffin, no headstone. Only quicklimes scattered over the bodies to hold back the stench. To the revolutionaries, it was a victory they had erased the emblem of monarchy. But history, as always, refused to stand still. Soon after, the very voices that had cheered that day began to die in fear. The terror, la terreur, blanketed France. Thousands, nobles and peasants, priests and journalists, were sent to the guillotine. Even those who had condemned Marie Antoinette could not escape the blade they had praised. A year later, Robespierre, the leader of the Terror, was executed on the same square where the Queen had fallen. Yet Marie Antoinette's name did not finish. In small Parisian houses, people began to whisper of the pitiable Queen, who had departed in silence, with an apology soft as wind. Romantic poets, musicians, and painters of the 19th century reshaped her image not as a monstrous spendthrift, but as a tragic emblem, beautiful, proud, crushed by the wrath of her age. In 1815, after Napoleon's defeat and the restoration of the Bourbon monarchy, King Louis XVIII, brother of Louis XVI, ordered the exhumation of his brothers and sister-in-law's remains. A team was sent to the Madeleine Cemetery. By then mossy and forgotten, they dug through layers of earth, lime, and human remains to find two skeletons believed to be the king and queen. They say that when the pit was opened, a lace cord and a scrap of white cloth were still visible, perhaps part of the dress Marie Antoinette had worn at her execution. Her remains, and those of Louis XVI, were carried to the Basilica of Saint-Denis, resting place of French kings. For the first time in more than 20 years, they were buried as human beings, not as hated symbols. As the priest spoke the final prayers, many in the escort wept. Some elderly Parisians came, knelt in silence outside, and whispered an old sentence whose meaning had changed. Did her sins truly merit such a death? In the centuries since, Marie Antoinette's image has lived between two poles on one side. The wasteful, unfeeling spendthrift. On the other, the misunderstood woman ground beneath history's wheel. Historiens argue, artistes praise, filmmakers enshrine, The more they try to define her, the more elusive and compelling she becomes. Some say she died of pride. Some say she died for being born at the wrong time. Perhaps she died for something deeper, because she embodied luxury in an age that craved equality, and thus had to be sacrificed to clear a path for a new world. Today, at Versailles, her bedroom remains pale floral walls, a finely carved bed, light falling through the window where she once looked out over the gardens. Everything is quiet, beautiful to the point of dread. No more cheers. No more blade. Only a question echoing in the air. Did the world truly become more just after they cut off a queen's head? Perhaps only history. And nights like this, when we tell her story, is where Marie Antoinette's soul truly lives again. After Marie Antoinette's death, France seemed to have shed the burden of the past. They had executed a king, beheaded a queen, and believed revolutionary justice was done. Reality differed within months. France plunged into a darkness like no other, where those who cried liberty, equality, fraternity began killing their own comrades. That era was called La Terreur, the terror. Paris drowned in fear. Each day, hundreds were led to the guillotine. Nobles, priests, physicians, even revolutionaries who had once fought for freedom. No one was safe. Today's accuser could be tomorrow's victim. And in that frenzy, those who had rejoiced at Marie Antoinette's death mounted the scaffold in their turn. Antoine Fouquier-Tinville, the prosecutor who had charged her with incest, was guillotined in 1795. Robespierre, the revolution's leader, was executed on the very square where the Queen had fallen. Blood flowed until no one remembered why they had begun. Meanwhile, Marie Antoinette's remains lay buried deep beneath quicklime in the Madeleine Cemetery. Amid the bodies of thousands, no visitors, no stone, only silence. But silence, sometimes, is the beginning of atonement. 22 years later, in 1815, when the Bourbon monarchy was restored after Napoleon's fall, King Louis XVIII, brother of Louis XVI, ordered that the king's and queen's remains be found. A team of diggers went to the former Madeleine Cemetery, by then a small garden thick with grass and moss. After days of searching, they uncovered two skeletons side by side. One male, one female, with traces of rotted white fabric and strands of white hair in the earth. All signs pointed to Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. On the 21st of January, 1815, exactly 22 years after the king's execution, a solemn burial was held at the Basilica of Saint-Denis, resting place of France's kings. Thousands of Parisians lined the route, no longer shouting or throwing stones, but bowing their heads. To the somber voice of the organ, two coffins draped in white were lowered into the crypt. There, for the first time in many years, her name was spoken with respect: Marie Antoinette d'Autriche, Reine de France et de Navarre, Marie Antoinette of Austria, Queen of France and of Navarre. The 19th century, with the rise of Romanticism, resurrected Marie Antoinette in Europe's imagination. Writers, poets, and painters no longer saw in her a foolish spendthrift, but a tragic woman crushed by her age. Her likeness appears in the paintings of Lisbeth Vigée-Lebrun, with a gentle smile, distant gaze, and softly piled curls, no longer a symbol of guilt, but of fragility poised between power and fate. Her story gradually became a warning to the world that when people love justice so blindly, they can become more cruel than what they sought to oppose. In the 20th century, filmmakers and novelists brought her back to the public, from the black and white films of the 1930s to Sofia Coppola's gorgeously colored Marie Antoinette in 2006. Each era found a different facet of her: the innocent girl, the desperate mother, or the emblem of a collapsing old world. Today, if you go to Versailles and step into the small room where she once wrote letters to her sister, you'll see the evening light fall through the window onto a portrait of her at 18, the face still radiant, the eyes clear, untouched by fate. And if you listen closely, perhaps you'll hear a whisper somewhere in those gilded corridors: "They took my crown, but they never took my heart." Marie Antoinette, once the most hated woman in France, died in silence. Yet in the end, that very silence became the loudest voice, a voice that outlasted revolution and hatred, reminding humanity that all power is temporary, while dignity endures. When the guillotine fell, Paris held its breath for a heartbeat. Then the crowd roared. A human tide surged, and the shout split the October sky. But as Marie Antoinette's blood seeped into the cold stones, none of them knew that in that moment, a chapter of France died as well. Those who had dreamed of liberty, equality, fraternity were now so drunk on blood that they no longer knew whom they punished, or why. In the months that followed, the city went mad. The guillotine never stopped. Each day, carts laden with prisoners rattled down the old streets. Those who had cheered the Queen's death now began to see friends and family dragged away. Every night, cries from the Place de la Révolution mingled with the rain, a lullaby of horror for a deranged age. Soon enough, those who had accused Marie Antoinette paid in turn. Tinville, the prosecutor who had stood before her in triumph, was condemned as a counter-revolutionary and beheaded. Robespierre, who had believed himself the voice of justice, fell beneath the very blade he had raised. The revolution's killing machine finally devoured itself. Versailles fell silent. No more balls. No more dance music. Only empty rooms. And giant mirrors reflecting darkness. People said that on moonlit nights, in the Trianon gardens, you could sometimes hear silk rustling, footsteps passing lightly along the misted paths. A young woman, hair white as frost, in a white dress, walks slowly among the withered flowers. Not a queen, not a prisoner, merely the spirit of a vanished age. 20 years passed. France changed kings, regimes, and even memories. Then one day, the name returned, no longer with hatred, but with pity. When the remains of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette were found beneath the cold earth of the Madeleine Cemetery, the crowd fell quiet. At the funeral in the Basilica of Saint-Denis, even those who had mocked the monarchy knelt. They did not kneel to a throne, but to a late truth. History may condemn a person, but time restores dignity to those who kept their character in the last moment. From then on, Marie Antoinette's image transformed. The mocking caricatures were replaced by the canvases of Viguier Lebrun, the painter who had loved her as a friend. In those paintings, Marie is no longer the emblem of excess, but a gentle mother with distant, sorrowful eyes and a smile as thin as a thread about to snap. People looked and understood that behind the sins of power, there is still a heart that feels pain. The centuries rolled on. Versailles opened to the public. Visitors walked the gilded corridors, gazed at the splendid rooms she once passed through. But if you go there in the late afternoon, when the last light slants in through the windows, you'll notice something strange. Amid all that splendor floats a faint sadness, as if the walls still remember every sigh. Guides like to joke. If you hear rustling skirts in the garden, don't be afraid. It's only the wind. Yet sometimes someone lingers, stares long into the glass, and whispers, "She is still here," and perhaps she is. For whenever the world speaks of human cruelty, the frailty of power, or the price of pride. The name Marie Antoinette rises, like both a warning and a plea for mercy. She died, but her story lives not in classroom lectures, but in the memory of what people can do when they let hatred lead. Perhaps that is why, more than 200 years later, we still tell it night after night, between uneasy dreams, as a way to ask ourselves, did the world truly become more just after we cut off a queen's head? Now there remain only Versailles and the cold winds that sweep the Trianon gardens. And if you listen very closely, in the quiet night, you may hear a whisper as thin as breath. They may take my crown, but they will never take my heart. Then everything sinks back into stillness, and in that stillness, Marie Antoinette lives on no longer as Queen of France, but as an immortal witness to the cost of power and the final beauty of human dignity. After the solemn funeral at Saint-Denis, candles flickered against a newly carved stone, bearing the simple words, Marie Antoinette, Reine de France. No titles, no praise, only a name, bare and quiet, yet enough to return to her a portion of the personhood history had stripped away. France was not yet at peace. Revolutions, counter-revolutions, and coups broke like waves on shore. Flags changed, kings changed, constitutions changed, yet the spectre of the past would not release them. That spectre wore no crown, not crimson velvet, but a thin white dress and the steady gaze of a woman who had died with honor. In 19th century literature, the name Marie Antoinette returned without its old stigma. Alexandre Dumas, Lamartine, Stéphane Zweig, they saw her not as an emblem of extravagance, but as a victim of her time. Zweig, in Marie Antoinette, the portrait of an average woman, called her a human being swept into the whirlwind of history, never fully understanding why she was there. The line sounds like a merciful judgment, not only for her, but for the whole 18th century, in which the most beautiful souls were crushed by their own dreams. As time passed, it became clearer that Marie Antoinette's death symbolized Europe's ruthless transformation. She was born into the world of absolute monarchy, where everything was decided by blood and ritual, but she died in the age of reason, when the crowd claimed the right to judge even God. Between those worlds, she was lost, too proud to understand the people, yet too human to live as an untouchable idol. And then time, like a fair judge, did what history could not. It returned her to silence. No more curses, no more cheers, only Versailles, still standing, splendid and desolate. The gilded walls still catch the morning light, but there is no music, no laughter. In the little room at the Petit Trianon, a small portrait rests, her clear eyes gazing far away, as if still waiting for someone to cross the threshold. The gardener at Trianon says that whenever the mist rises, he hears light footsteps on the gravel paths, unsure whether it is wind, imagination, or the memory of an unquiet soul. They say Marie Antoinette's spirit still wanders here, not to reclaim a throne, but to seek the peace she never knew in life. 200 years have passed, and the world has changed. Empires once mighty have vanished, yet her story is still told. In films, on the page, and in the minds of those who want to understand the price of power and the delicate beauty of our humanity. For after all, what people remember is not the crown or the glittering balls, but the final moment on the scaffold, when she bowed and apologized to the very man who would kill her. In a world brimming with hatred, that act turned her from an emblem of guilt into a symbol of mercy. People often say history belongs to the victors, but sometimes history bows to the one who lost and never lost her dignity. Marie Antoinette was that great loser. Now, whenever night falls over, Versailles and silver moonlight drapes the glittering roofs. One can imagine a small figure moving slowly along a drafty corridor. The faint rustle of silk, a breath light as wind. And somewhere in the air, perhaps she is still whispering, "They may take my crown, but they will never take my heart." For that heart, though betrayed, humiliated, and severed from its body, still beats in humanity's memory. And there, in the vast remembrance of nights like this, Marie Antoinette still lives. Marie Antoinette's story does not end at a cold grave. Her death, in a way, became a mirror for Europe's conscience. After the blood of a king and queen soaked into Parisian stones, courts across the continent trembled. From Vienna, her mother, Empress Maria Theresa, was long gone. But her siblings, the Habsburg archdukes and archduchesses, kept that death as a wound that never healed. Secret letters from Austria to France carried a mix of fury and shame. A daughter of the empire has been killed by those who once bowed before her. And yet, the irony is that this very death made France, the supposed victor, lose its soul. They killed the emblem of the past, but failed to create a future. Successive regimes, from Napoleon to Louis Philippe, all faced the hanging question: was France truly freer after the guillotine fell in the years that followed? When Versailles reopened, the first visitors were not royals or nobles, but ordinary people. They came, passed through the most resplendent halls in the world, and stood silent before the Queen's bedroom. Some wept. Some only sighed. Though time had erased every trace of blood, the air still held something, an emptiness that quivered like regret. An old soldier who had witnessed the execution later recalled, "When the blade fell, I thought I saw light in her eyes, not fear, but serenity." He never forgot it. Time moved on. The world entered the 19th century. Then the 20th. Empires fell. Rulers rose and vanished. But Marie Antoinette's story kept being told, as the emblem of the price people pay when power separates from compassion. From the pages of Stefan Zweig to Sofia Coppola's luminous film, she is no longer seen as a spendthrift, but as a soul betrayed by history, a woman born to silk, hurled into the storm of her age, still trying to keep the last fragile piece of her humanity. In Vienna's Hofburg Museum, her letters to her mother and sister are still on display. The handwriting trembles. Ink blurs, yet every line brims with loneliness. One of the final letters, written only days before her execution, reads, "I do not fear death. I fear only being forgotten." But history did not forget. And perhaps that is what made her story immortal. Many historians say there was harsh justice in Marie Antoinette's death, that she paid for years of luxury. But if justice truly exists, then did those who cheered beneath the scaffold pay with the emptiness in their souls? No one won that day. The French Revolution may have opened a new era, but it also buried beauty, grace, and the compassion that once formed Europe's soul. Gradually, people began to understand Marie Antoinette did not die because she was a queen, but because she was human, a human who dared to be vulnerable, to weep, to bow and apologize in her last moment. That is what let her rise above death and endure as a symbol of humanity amid an age of brutality. If you go to Versailles today, stand on the balcony where she once looked down upon the gardens, the wind still blows as it did 200 years ago. The grass still whispers, and marble statues still stare toward the horizon. There, you will feel something suspended, not a ghost, but the memory of pride and pain. They say every empire fades, every throne collapses, Yet some souls remain, wandering between the worlds of living and dead, not to demand justice, but to remind us of a simple truth. Do not let hatred make you forget that we are all human. Perhaps that is why, more than 2 centuries later, when moonlight falls on Versailles, in the misted gardens of the Petit Trianon, some still swear they see a woman walking slowly through the lavender hair, silver white, faccia serene. And in the stirring wind comes a distant whisper, I do not regret living as myself. Marie Antoinette, a woman born to be a queen, who died to become a legend, not a legend of power, but of dignity within tragedy, the last soft light that even history cannot extinguish. When night falls over Paris and the golden lamps of the Rue de Rivoli reflect on the Seine, the dome of the Conciergerie still rises through the mist. There, more than 200 years ago, Marie Antoinette waited for death in a small, damp room with only a narrow window to an ashen sky. Today, that room is a memorial, preserved almost as it was. Cold walls, a reconstructed straw bed, a small bronze cross, and a white cloth embroidered with her name. Visitors enter and usually say nothing. They stand still, and sometimes someone begins to cry without knowing why. Perhaps because they see not only a queen, but the fragility of the human being before the ruthless force of events. For in any century, we fear being misunderstood, condemned, and denied the chance to speak a final word. And that is why her story touches every generation. Some modern historians, rereading letters, diaries, and testimonies, we have begun to see a very different Marie Antoinette, not a reckless spender, but a girl forced to grow up in court, forbidden to err, forbidden to be real, not a cruel queen, but a mother who loved her children to the edge of despair, not a symbol of guilt, but an emblem of endurance, of loneliness, caught between power and prejudice. There is a letter, little known and found in the Vienna archives, written when she was only 18. Dear Mother, sometimes I feel like a doll in Versailles, looked at by everyone, heard by no one. Simple words, but they hold an entire life. And reading them, we realize perhaps her greatest tragedy was not death, but being seen all her life and never understood. Centuries have passed, and her image still changes with the soul of each age. In the eyes of revolutionaries, she was once a monster. In the eyes of the royalists, she was a martyr. In the eyes of the people of today, she is a woman trapped between 2 worlds, the world of the throne and the world of the crowd. When you stand inside the Basilica of Saint-Denis, before the tombs of her and Louis XVI, you will see candles that someone renews every day. No one knows who they are. Perhaps descendants of old nobility, perhaps travelers, perhaps simply passers-by. Yet that flame, in silence, burns like an apology France sends to its own past. Because justice is not always the blade. Sometimes justice is the quiet admission that we were wrong. There is a strange irony, though she was condemned as an enemy of liberty. It was Marie Antoinette who taught posterity the meaning of inner freedom. In her final hours, stripped of title, wealth, family, and life, she was free in her own way, free to choose how to die. No screams, no curses, no pleas, only one sentence, pardon me. Sire, I did not mean to do it. That apology small, polite, yet echoing like a bell through centuries, marked the moment a human being rose above humiliation to preserve the last ember of dignity. And in that instant, Marie Antoinette triumphed, not over the revolution, but over the cruelty of her age. Her death did not erase the sins of monarchy, But it carved into history one truth: no power endures except humanity itself. And perhaps that is why, more than 200 years later, her name is still spoken with respect, sorrow, and awe. Now, as sunset settles over Versailles and red light glances off the golden gates and the silent marble statues, it feels as though the palace breathes, whispering old stories. And somewhere in the wind, you might hear a voice softly say, "They took my crown, but they could not take my heart," a phrase light as breath, yet strong enough to make history fall silent, because in the end, Marie Antoinette did not only die as a queen, she lives forever as a reminder that amid the storm of hatred and power, dignity remains the one light that cannot be extinguished. And as long as one person keeps that light alive, the world still has hope. Epilogue. And so the story of Marie Antoinette, the woman who once wore Europe's brightest crown and fell upon the revolution's scaffold, closes in silence. But if you listen closely, you will realize it never truly ends. For whenever we speak of pride, of dignity, of quiet grace in the storm, her name returns, no longer as a symbol of extravagance, but as a symbol of humanity, fragile, fearful, yet still able to lift its head. People may argue endlessly about her faults, about the golden years of Versailles, but one thing cannot be denied in her final moment. Marie Antoinette lived true to the noblest part of the soul, not the soul of a queen, but that of a woman, a mother, a daughter who could feel pain, love, and forgiveness, even for the hands that bound her. There is a strange justice in history. Those who shouted at her death are forgotten. Yet her name, the humiliated, slandered, slain one, still lingers, because in her silence, she found strength greater than the world's screams. Look closely, and you will see her shadow standing like a beautiful paradox, both victim and emblem, both trampled and immortal. Marie Antoinette died, but her dignity did not. It lives on, flickering through every story humanity retells, like a candle that never burns out in the cold chamber of memory. Perhaps that is why tonight, as you lie listening to this story, you are not only hearing about a queen, but about yourself, the part of you that once trembled, once broke, yet still wished to rise again with grace. Because who among us has not felt like Marie Antoinette, misunderstood, condemned by those who never truly knew us? Thrown into a trial where no defense could matter, and left with only one thing to save us: dignity. That dignity does not need applause or recognition. It only needs that we do not betray ourselves. Just as she, walking to the scaffold, head held high, eyes serene, voice soft as air, said, "Pardon me, Sire, I did not mean to do it." A small sentence, containing an ocean of strength. That sentence still echoes through humanity's mind, reminding us that true nobility lies not in royal blood, but in how we face our pain. If history is a river, then Marie Antoinette is the bright stone carried along its current, her light still shimmering beneath the surface. And we, sitting in the dark, listening to her story, are perhaps gazing at that light, learning to accept, to forgive, to hold a little calm within life's storms. Because whoever you are, wherever you come from, you too have your own Versailles, a place once splendid, now quiet, and someday, you too will have to learn as she did to stand amid the ruins without losing gentleness. So if tonight you feel unsteady, if your heart still carries unhealed wounds, remember this: there was once a woman who lost everything: honor, family, life, yet still left the world with a peaceful smile. And if she could do it, then so can you. Let the noise outside fade. Let the accusations inside your mind grow silent. Breathe deeply. Close your eyes and let your heart rest. You do not need to become anyone else to deserve forgiveness or love. You only need to be yourself, whole, honest, and kind like Marie Antoinette in her final moment. This story may have touched sorrow, but do not fear it. Sometimes sadness is the doorway to peace. In the dim glow of a candle, in the tender breath of night, we realize that even the cruelest history hides a small mercy for those who can pause, to be silent, and still love. And so, as you reach this final moment, Paris has fallen asleep. Outside the window, wind stirs through the trees. The Seine keeps flowing, quiet as memory. And far away at Versailles, moonlight still glides through an old window, across the room where a queen once dreamed of freedom. If you close your eyes, perhaps you will hear the softest steps, the faint rustle of silk, and a whisper saying, "Sleep well, little one. Time will forgive all things." And the night closes like that, slow, gentle, full of forgiveness. A story ends, but its echo stays within you, like a candle still burning. Thank you for listening to the very end. Thank you for walking with me through the journey of a soul once misunderstood by the world, yet who chose to leave it with a smile. Now, breathe deeply. Set your burdens down and let your eyes close in peace. Sleep well, and if you dream of Marie Antoinette, tell her the world has finally understood. Good night, and I'll see you in the next story, where another soul waits to be heard.